Jerry slash Amy for that very kind introduction. Uh, I listened to that and it's hard to believe. I don't know if I did all that or not, but great job. Time has passed. I've now worked 34 years in the groundwater field here in Prince Edward County. As you mentioned, my first job right out of university at a small consulting company, Lissom Earth Sciences, based right here downtown Picton. When I say here, I live in Picton, so it's kind of nice. I'm sitting here in my family room looking out. Uh, if you would have told me 4 years ago that I would be sitting here talking about groundwater through a computer to a group of other people sitting at home, I would have said, no way is that ever going to happen. Well, I think it just attests to how adaptable we humans are in the face of adversity. We come up with ways to change the ways we do things and continually improve. So definitely good. And thank you to everybody for showing up tonight. I hope I'm able to teach you or share some of the things that I've learned about groundwater here in Prince Edward County over the years. I put together a little presentation with some slides, and we'll start leading through them now. I like to call it a groundwater 101. I'll start off with what groundwater is, describe how you find it, how it flows, a little bit of information about groundwater in Prince Edward County. Some of the information that I'm going to share with you is some of the studies that we've done at Quinte Conservation on groundwater over the years, which is all available on our website. And I'll just do some snippets of different things from those studies. We'll talk about groundwater quality, what the quality of our groundwater is like here in Prince Edward County, and we'll wrap up with a discussion about groundwater quantity and climate change and what the future might hold for our groundwater. Uh, Groundwater is often referred to as the hidden treasure. And the reason why it is a hidden treasure, it's very important ecologically, but also it's important water supply for many, many people. If we kind of zoom out here a bit and look at Canada as a whole, 30% of the residents in Canada rely on groundwater for their water supply. That's around 11 or 12 million people. A lot of people use groundwater daily for their drinking water. Of those, about 3 million, around 25% of them are right here in Ontario. So significant population in Ontario relying on groundwater. Something really special about Ontario is two of the largest municipalities in Canada that rely on groundwater for their water supply are the City of Guelph and Kitchener-Waterloo, almost 100% groundwater supply. Those cities, like their population's 150,000 people in Guelph and well over 200,000 people in Kitchener-Waterloo. Some very significant groundwater resources in those areas. Now we talk a little bit more locally in the Quinte watershed. And when I say the Quinte watershed, that's the whole jurisdiction of Quinte Conservation, which includes Prince Edward County, the Moira River shed running north of Belleville up towards Bancroft, as well as the Salmon and the Napanee River watershed. So about 130,000 people, 50% rely on groundwater. So even higher yet, the percentage of people using wells and groundwater for the water supply. And then last but not least, here in Prince Edward County, we don't have the benefit of having some of the larger urban centers like Belleville. So we have an even higher percentage, 60% of the residents of Prince Edward County rely on groundwater for their daily water supply. So just where does all this groundwater come from? Well, we need to look at the hydrologic cycle to get an understanding of where our water comes from. Quite often in the past, people thought of the hydrologic cycle as rain falling to the earth, running over the ground surface into our lakes and streams and rivers, evaporating back up into the clouds, condensing and falling again. But there's a very important component of the hydrologic cycle that cannot be missed, and that's this component. When the rain falls on the earth, some of it infiltrates down into the ground, into the cracks between the rocks and the soil particles, and falls down into the what we call the water table or in our aquifers, continues to flow in those aquifers towards our local streams and rivers, And again, evaporation occurs off the surface of the lakes and rivers, but a very important component is the transpiration, which supports our plants. The best way to describe transpiration is when you go out in a summer morning and your feet get wet from walking through the grass, the dew on the grass. That is the leaves transpiring the water. Then sometime in the summer, you might find you go out and your feet are dry. And what's happening then is there's no more soil moisture left, not enough rain. So that's the deficit period when we run short of water in the summer months. We've done quite a bit of work at Quinte Conservation looking at the water budget and how much water this area receives. So on an annual basis, we get 3 feet or a meter of precipitation. So that's snow and rain combined falling on the ground surface. That's a lot of water. Um, However, we do have a fairly warm climate, so an active growing vegetation, 2/3 of the 3 feet, so 2 feet is consumed by evapotranspiration. Amazing amount of water is lost. So that is all controlled by temperature. We can't turn down the temperature to make things cool off and slow down the evapotranspiration. So that's a component of the water cycle that is controlled by Mother Nature. It leaves us with 1 foot of water available to recharge our groundwater and run off into our streams and rivers. And the work that we've done, we've come up with it's equally roughly equal, 50% into the ground, 50% runoff. So what is groundwater in an aquifer? Well, we know from the water cycle that the water infiltrates down into the ground. And a lot of people think that it collects in underground rivers and streams and lakes. Well, that's not actually quite the case. The groundwater fills up the cracks in our rocks and the particle spaces between our soil. And where those cracks in the rocks are big enough and the particle spaces between our soil are big enough and they transmit enough water, that's called an aquifer. So basically, it's just all the little spaces in below the ground surface. Where all those spaces are filled, it becomes a saturated zone. And the top of that saturated layer is called the water table, which you see here in this diagram. And above, we have the unsaturated zone. And then we might be wondering how groundwater flows. Well, groundwater flows by gravity. It flows from high areas to low areas. So if you look at the topography of the land it's basically the same as what you see on the surface. When water hits the ground surface, it runs off into our local streams and rivers. If the land is sloping downhill, there's a pretty good chance that underground, the groundwater will be flowing in the same direction. Here we have a diagram showing the slope of the water table. So the water is going to follow this slope in a downhill direction. It's very important. Groundwater happens to discharge to our local wetlands to keep them topped up, and wetlands actually help slow down the movement of water. We want to control the movement of water to prevent it from running off quickly, so we have a chance to recharge our local aquifers. And also, we'll see where the water table comes out to the ground surface is usually where we find springs. And then in the streams and rivers, a good example of some of our local streams and rivers that receive groundwater recharge is the Warings Creek watershed. That is a cold water creek. And the reason why that creek is cold is because groundwater is maintained at a constant temperature around 8 or 9 degrees Celsius. So that one is one of the few cold water streams in the Prince Edward County watershed. The other streams do receive groundwater discharge to keep them replenished, but you'll notice quite a few of those will dry up in the summer months, and that's because the water table falls. I'll talk about a little bit later the fluctuation of the water table here in Prince Edward County, and basically when you're looking at some of those streams and rivers, it hasn't been rained in a while. It's usually groundwater that's holding up the flow. When they dry up in the summer months, the water table's fallen down below. There's no more discharge to those local streams and rivers. Uh, in terms of aquifers, there's two main types of aquifers, and we basically call them an unconfined aquifer. So this would be the shallow aquifer. There's no layer of material that would restrict the movement of water from the ground surface down into this aquifer. So the movement of rainfall can take from days to weeks to reach to our shallow aquifer very quickly. Uh, Down below deeper, if we have confining layers, thick deposits of clay or so low permeability rock, the water cannot move as quickly. It takes much longer for the rain to infiltrate down into those aquifers, from months to years. This is very important when we're thinking about groundwater contamination and how vulnerable our aquifers are. As you can see, some of the activities here in the ground surface, the same as the rain recharging the groundwater, any of these activities could end up contaminating our shallow groundwater, whereas in the deeper confined aquifers, they're much more protected by thicker layers of impermeable deposits. And we'll talk about this more, but in Prince Edward County, we generally don't have these deep confined aquifers. We have shallow, unconfined aquifers, which receive rapid recharge, thankfully, from rainfall to keep the levels up, but it also creates some vulnerable conditions to contamination. So just where is the groundwater found in Prince Edward County? This slide here, the information is taken right out of the municipal groundwater study. It was a Quinte regional study done for the whole watershed. Prince Edward County was an active participant. It was completed back in 2004. So it is a little bit dated, but I can say that the groundwater conditions haven't changed. So this information is still relevant. In Prince Edward County, at the time of the study, there was around 4,350 registered wells. So when I say registered wells, means that there was well records on file with the Ministry of Environment for wells that have been installed. We did a review of those records and we found that 98% of those wells were completed in limestone bedrock. So if you take a drive around the countryside of Prince Edward County through some of the rock cuts, you'll see that we are quite blessed with limestone bedrock, lots of rock, not so much soil in areas. So it would make sense that most of the wells do obtain water supply from that fractured bedrock aquifer. However, we do have some areas of soil, and the Ridge Road, the Warings Creek watershed, the Ridge Road esker, as well as the Picton esker running out to Cherry Valley, are two examples of areas where there is some pretty significant deposits of soil. So we end up having about 2% of the wells completed in soil. The majority of the wells, they're less than 20 meters deep or 60 feet. So it's relatively shallow groundwater, as I mentioned before. And there is a good reason for that. If the wells are drilled too deep in this area, generally speaking, there's a higher chance of getting naturally poor water quality. And I'll explain that a little bit later, what naturally poor water quality means, but the fresher water is in the shallower zones, less than 20 meters deep. The average flow rates for these wells in Prince Edward County is 4 gallons per minute, with 43% of the wells less than 3 gallons per minute. Now, to put that into context, most mortgage companies consider a flow rate for a well to be reasonably expected to supply a house at 3 gallons per minute. So we have 43% at less than 3 gallons per minute. So we don't have very high flow wells in the Prince Edward County region. And in fact, of the well records we reviewed, 16% of them were reported as dry. Just to explain a little bit more about the well records, whenever a well is drilled, it is a record is filled out and submitted with the Ministry of Environment. Those are all public records. And I had a little website here that I was going to click on and show you, but it didn't work for me. So I've provided that website if you wanted to go on and have a look at the map a map will show up. It's a little GIS system. This is Prince Edward County. Each one of the blue dots are wells, and you're able to zoom in to your house and click on the blue dot, and up will pop your well record. There's options for PDFs and HTMLs, but I do recommend that you click on the PDF because it's much more easier to read. And if you have a newer well that's drilled since 2002 on, there's a good chance that your well will have a tag on it, like in this picture here. And if you have the number on that tag and you go to this website, you can simply push in or enter in the well tag number and your well record will come up. But prior to that, there was no tagging system. This was a great improvement to how well records are maintained. So it's a little bit of a guessing by golly when you're looking at the records. I just have a couple examples here. The formats have changed over the years. So this is an older style record for one of the wells that was drilled for the Moyer River Conservation Authority over in the Belleville area. It gives really good information about the diameter of the well, how deep it is, what the formation was that they drilled through. This particular well was 3 gallons per minute. It tells if the water was clear, what the quality was like, if it was fresh, who drilled the well, as well as a little sketch map to help you try to locate it. So as I mentioned there earlier, since 2002, they've improved because of the well tags. They now take GPS coordinates. So this is one that has a well tag, the number at the top, and the personal information is blacked out. So it's because of freedom of information. They don't put people's names. Well, there are people's names on the records, but they do not share that. So unfortunately, you're not able to verify, say you're looking at somebody's well that um, did or somebody that previously owned your house. If you're looking for their name, you won't be able to find that. But there still is the sketch map, which you can look up and you can look at the flow and the materials that the well was drilled through. Another source, this is the a map that was put in our groundwater study, the 2004 study, which looked at the yields of all the different wells to identify areas where there's a probability of getting a higher yield well. Now the scale doesn't show up here, but the nice yellow areas, well yields are greater than 10 gallons per minute. So you can see we do have a few areas. That Ridge Road Esker formation that I mentioned between Picton and Westlake is a good area. You can see it's lighter colored. The blue, darker blue color are well yields of 2 gallons per minute or less. You can see we do have quite a few of the darker areas. Nonetheless, 2 gallons per minute is still lots of water to get your house by. The other information that we have available to us on groundwater in Prince Edward County is a program that the conservation authorities in Ontario partner with the Ministry of Environment on. It's called the Provincial Groundwater Monitoring Network. There are over 500 monitor wells across the province. 29 of those wells are within the Quinte watershed and 11 right here in Prince Edward County. So I showed a map here showing the different well locations. Some of these are on private properties, but we do have some in some of our conservation areas. Macaulay Mountain has 2 wells. If you ever walk some of the trails, you may see a well with a green box on top and a bunch of funny looking equipment. That well, or those wells have data loggers in them that measure the water every hour, 24 hours a day. And inside the box, there's telemetry equipment that records that data, transmits it to satellites in the sky, and from there down to the computers in our office so we can get really up-to-date water level data. I have a graph that I'll show you, but just a couple other wells throughout Demarest-ville. We have one out towards Highway 62 coming down that way. Ameliasburg, there's some, quite a few wells spread throughout, most of them in the limestone aquifer. So we get a good idea on the water levels throughout Prince Edward County. Now, this funny looking thing is a graph of the water levels from the well at Macaulay Mountain. So I picked the year 2020 as being a kind of an average year on how the groundwater behaves. So we start out here in the winter months. This is our water level in the well, slowly declining slightly as it's going downhill. Usually, or in the old days, back when we used to get winters where the ground would freeze, there's no recharge happening. Quite often we'd see the water table drop, and then we'd have our spring melt of snow, just as similar as we see in our local streams and rivers. We get the spring freshet in the groundwater, and you can see here the groundwater rises in the spring normally, and then begins to start its decline through the spring and the summer months to a low, usually in the month of October. And what's happening here, although we are getting rain and getting recharge, all these little spikes that you see are recharge events occurring. Most of our water, as I mentioned before in the description of the water cycle, is used up by evapotranspiration. So that is why this water table is falling over the spring and summer months. As our plants are growing, it's using the water that we receive. We're not getting as much groundwater recharge. When things cool off in the fall and we do get rain, the water is more available for recharge, and we see it start to increase all the way up to the end of the year, and the cycle begins over again. So you might be wondering what's happening this year. So I've taken the graph, whoops, yeah, the graph, same one from 2020 from the well at Macaulay. That's the black line from 2020 under normal year. I've provided the levels from the beginning of this year to current for the same well. And you can see they were following a similar trend. So we haven't had any frost in the ground, which is maybe a good thing. What rain and snow we have received has kept our groundwater levels topped up. However, you might see there's a bit of a discrepancy here. Back in 2020, we did have snow that melted and we saw an increase in our water table. This year, we have not seen that increase so far. Now, I'm not very good at predicting the weather, so I hate to kind of speculate, but generally speaking, when we don't have these releases of snow, snow is a way of storing water and releasing it later on in the year, closer to when we need to use that water. It could lead to drought conditions, but we'll wait and see what kind of weather conditions we see. We may have a very wet April, you never know. One of the mysteries about groundwater, probably, we know quite a bit about from well drilling in Prince Edward County, where the water's found, what yield to expect, how deep you might have to go with your well. But there is a couple mysteries, and one of them being the lake on the mountain. So I have a picture here showing the lake up on top of this mountain, perched approximately 180, 200 feet above the Bay of Quinte. This is all a bedrock escarpment. Very peculiar to have a lake in a bedrock environment. It's not a kettle lake sitting on top of the bedrock. There's been a lot of studies done by different academics trying to figure out why is Lake on the Mountain there. It's very similar to Robin Lake and Fish Lake as well. They are both close to bedrock escarpments, yet they hold the water. So I read some studies over the years that I've collected. And back in the 60s, when the lake was frozen, they went out and they drilled some holes through the ice and drilled into the sediments below. And what they came up with the theory was this lake is a big sinkhole. So what happened was the limestone in the shallow zones dissolved from water flowing through them, and the rock actually collapsed, creating this big sinkhole. Same theory applied to the other lakes. So their theory is that the water in these lakes is being replenished by groundwater because there is not a very large drainage area, significant streams or rivers running into these lakes. So that is one theory. A recent study that I looked at was Queen's University came up with some of their fancy geophysical instruments, and we're trying to detect, you basically walk across the ground surface with these instruments, trying to detect zones in the bedrock where there'd be a lot of water flowing through. And lo and behold, they weren't able to find anything in the bedrock, which, I kind of see that theory because the reason why the water in those lakes stays in them on the edge of a bedrock escarpment is that the bedrock would be quite tight, not letting water flowing through. But a common thought would be that the water has to come from someplace. And so we've done some work on the Robin Lake watershed because that is one of the watersheds where there is a municipal drinking water system. There's an inlet into the lake that supplies the village of Ameliasburg, largely because they couldn't have good wells in that little hamlet and they had to come up with a new water supply. And based on our water budget exercise that we did, we concluded by default that the water would have to come from the ground in order to keep the levels up in the lake. So I think it's quite attractive that these lakes are mysteries, and I think it helps to draw people there, knowing that wow, this isn't really explained completely why these lakes are here or where the water's coming from, but that's just some of the cool things that we have here in Prince Edward County. Okay, we're going to move on to groundwater quality, and I'm just going to have a few slides here to speak about groundwater quality. Well, we've talked about groundwater quantity and how our aquifers get recharged by infiltrating rainfall. Well, it really wouldn't be unreasonable to expect that anything we put on the ground surface is actually going to seep into the ground and into our groundwater. Now, this little guy here, he just changed the oil on the car, and maybe back 50 years ago, they used to do this kind of thing to keep the dust down on the driveway. They would spread the oil on the driveway to keep the dust down. But little did he know, this was leaking into our water table. He has a well nearby. And what happens when you turn the pump on in your well, you cause the water table to drop in the well itself, creating a slope, or what hydrogeologists call is a cone of depression. So you're going to cause these contaminants to move towards your well. Definitely, this is an old, very old practice. I don't see people doing things like this anymore, but I just thought I'd include that as a slide, as an illustration of how our groundwater can get contaminated by things that we do on the ground surface. Likewise, our septic systems are designed to recharge our groundwater. So here we have a house with a normal conventional septic tank and a network of pipes. The treated effluent out of the septic tank goes through the pipes and is distributed through the soil. The theory or application is that the contaminants will get filtered out by the soil as they percolate down to the water table. Same thing happens again if the septic system is too close to your well. You turn the pump on, you draw the water table down, you cause things to move. So it's hoped that your septic system is working properly. And the reason why I include this slide is septic systems are a #1 source of contamination here in Prince Edward County. So it's very important to look after your septic and make sure that it's working properly. From the municipal groundwater study that I mentioned before, in addition to reviewing the well records for well yields and well depths, they also looked at the water quality that was reported on these records. And basically, what they found is the majority of the wells have good chemical water quality, but high hardness. And I mentioned earlier that as well depth increases, the potential of getting naturally poor water quality can increase. So here we have a bar graph showing the depths of the wells ranging from less than 5 meters up to more than 50 meters. So really deep. That's over 150 to 200 feet deep. And these little bars, the blue indicating fresh water, but these yellow bars indicate salt water, and the red is sulfur. So as you drill your well deeper, there is a very good chance that you may encounter salt water or even sulfur. Another thing that is can be encountered here in Prince Edward County is methane gas. And methane gas is something you do not want to have in your well because it's an explosion potential. One of the probably a little known fact is beneath the town of Picton, there's actually a gas pool here. And back in the old days, they used to drill wells to tap into that gas pool to run the street lamps on the main street of Picton. And some people have forgotten about that. I guess probably 10 or 15 years ago, the some of the newer buildings that are being built, doing the right thing by installing geothermal energy systems. One of the drilling machines that was here installing a geothermal well for the heating and cooling of a building, they hit this gas pool and the drill rig actually caught fire and the fire department had to come and put that out. So something to be aware. You don't want to get gas in your well. There's other kind of horror stories about encountering gas, but generally it is something that's encountered too deep. Um, that is speaking to the chemical quality. Very important to test the bacteriological quality of your well. So it is a free service through the local health unit where you can go. I believe it's down at the old tip of the bay at the base of the town hill where the health unit office is or was. I know that's in Belleville still. That you can go there and pick up a water test kit, go home, fill up the water bottle, take it back. They will analyze your water for free and mail you the results, telling you the bacteriological quality, whether it's safe to drink or not. It's recommended that you do that at least 3 times a year. I think it's a good idea to do it every season. As the season changes, check your water quality to see if it's good or not. And I'm going to show you a slide why this is really important for this area. And Public Health Ontario did a study from all those water tests taken by people living across Southern Ontario. So this is a map of Southern Ontario, Lake Ontario, Toronto here, Kingston, Prince Edward County in this area. It's all divided up into the different municipalities. Their study reviewed the test results from 2008 to 2012, over 90,000 samples. And basically what they were trying to do was to see where there's a higher probability of encountering bacteria, E. coli specifically, in the groundwater. And guess what they came up with? Number one cluster right on top of us here, Prince Edward County in the Quinte watershed. Number two down in the Niagara region, and number three up on the Bruce Peninsula. So a common factor to these three areas are shallow soils over fractured bedrock, which are highly vulnerable groundwater conditions. So that is the main reason why there was a higher probability of encountering bacteria in these areas. I say this to promote awareness, not to scare anybody. Is very important to maintain your septic system to make sure it's working, as well as I'm going to tell you about well construction and things you should be thinking about when you have a well to look after. The peace of mind of this study is out of all those 90,000 samples, only 6% tested positive for E. coli. So a low percentage, but nonetheless, it did identify significant clusters in our area as well as these other regions. So one of the things that you need to do to help protect your water supply is to make sure you have a properly constructed well. Now in Prince Edward County, there's basically 2 types of wells that are used for water supply. I have a picture here of a dug well, and that's a large diameter concrete casing, about 3 feet in diameter, that's installed in the ground. It's important that the casings are above ground surface so you don't have surface water running in the top. It's important to have the proper cap on the well so you don't get leakage of shallow water. And when the well is constructed, one of the most important things is that there's a proper seal of at least 8 feet thick of low permeability clay material to help prevent any of the shallow water from leaking down around the side of the casing. Just a couple pictures of some maybe improperly constructed dug wells. This is an old style rock lined well. Many of those wells out there, that's how they used to build them before there were well regulations. These will let a lot of shallow contaminated water in. Here we have a newer constructed well with the proper well tiles, but you can see the water running down the sides of the casing. The joints between these wells casings are not sealed properly. So that's letting infiltrating water get in. Down here in the lower left-hand corner, this well is not the proper height above ground, and it also has one of those two-piece caps, which let shallow water or any water running across the ground surface down in. I provide this picture. New code are these proper caps, which if you have one of these old caps that look like this, I highly recommend you contact a contractor to get a proper cap installed on the top of your dug well to keep that shallow water out, as well as any insects that might get in and contaminate your water. Drilled wells are the other type of well. Those are the ones that are go quite deep, more like a dug well might be only about 20 feet deep. Our drill wells, so those are ones that go down to 60 feet. Again, proper to have the casing above ground height, at least 40 centimeters, and a proper cap on it. We call it a vermin-proof cap. Two-piece cap with a seal in between the two pieces that prevents the entry of any insects getting into the well. Some examples of bad wells, bad drilled wells. These were some of the styles in the old days. They had well pits. So the drilled well was down in this pit, which is made up of the concrete well tiles. Water, shallow contaminated water can accumulate in this shallow well pit and then leak down the well. The best way to deal with this is to get rid of the well pit, have an upgrade done so your well would look like this with the casing sticking above ground. If you do have any openings or voids around your well casing, that's not a good sign. It can let any shallow water running across the ground surface infiltrate deeper down into the ground that can contaminate your water supply. Contact a contractor to get this fixed. And then this one, there's no well to be seen. That was common practice for a while too, is to cut the casings off below grade and bury them. At a site at a mine, not a good thing for your water supply well. Get an upgrade done on a well like this so it looks like this one above ground surface. Old, improperly abandoned wells, wells that are forgotten about and not dealt with, they are conduits for contaminants to get into the aquifer. There is a procedure for decommissioning these wells. It needs to be done by a licensed contractor. If you have any old wells in your property, I recommend that you get somebody in to decommission them. And just on the septic maintenance, have your septic tank pumped out regularly, at least every couple of years. If you do have a lot of water use or a lot of company over, and you may be just having a lot of use of your septic system, I recommend you get it pumped out more frequently. If your tank doesn't have one of these things, which is called a septic tank filter, I highly recommend that you get one of those put on because it helps keep the solids in the tank as opposed to getting out into your leaching field, which can plug it up, causing effluent to break out at the ground surface, wash into our local streams and rivers, as well as your own water supply. These need to be cleaned regularly as well, but they're a very good idea to have one installed. And lastly, be aware of what you're doing around your well. Create your own wellhead protection area, even if it's maybe 30 meters, 100 feet around your well. Don't do anything near your well that you don't want to have ended up in your water supply, such as filling up the lawnmower with gas, tying your dog to the well, storing fuel or any manure. Keep them well away from your well. Protect your water supply. And lastly, just to wrap this up, a little discussion about climate change and water quantity. I don't know how many people have, we probably anecdotally know that our temperatures are increasing, but if they've ever taken the time to look at some of the local climate data, I've gathered the data from the Environment Canada station in Belleville from 1920 to current, and looked at the trends of the average annual temperature. And over this last 100 years, it's just shown here in the blue dots and the sloping line illustrating the trend. I've seen an increase of 2 degrees Celsius to an average annual temperature from around 6.5 degrees up to 8.9. So definitely we are warming. There are sources of information which help project what our future climate might be. The Climate Atlas of Canada is one of those sources. I've looked at some of their data and included it here. The red line is projected increase in temperatures to the end of the century if we don't change our habits on consuming fossil fuels and it's a high emission scenario. So that's continuing business as normal. We will continue to see the temperature warm. By the end of the century, another 5 degrees to an average annual temperature of 14. However, if we change our ways and a low emission scenario, we can decrease this increase by 2.5 degrees to an average annual temperature of 11. And I include this slide because it relates back to the water cycle where I spoke about our annual amount of precipitation, 2/3 of it being consumed by evapotranspiration, which is controlled by temperature and Mother Nature. As our temperature increases, we can expect to lose more water to evapotranspiration. So it's important to try to do what we can to slow the warming of the climate and protect our water quantity as well. Drought is something that has happened here locally as well as across the province. Quinte Conservation, we administer the low water response program where we advise of the different levels of drought. Over the last 20 years, about half of the years, we've had some sort of low water declaration. And one of the ways I've looked at the impacts of drought is the amount of water that's hauled from our bulk water hauling stations in Picton and Wellington, information provided by the municipality graciously. And just a comparison of the water volumes here from 2014 to 2019, you might see one very high spike here, red, at both the Picton and Wellington stations. The water volume hauled in those years increased by 100%. That year was the only year that we have on record of a level 3, so that's the worst level drought that we can encounter. So definitely impacts on people's wells and groundwater when we run into droughts that they have to turn to alternative sources of water. Here we have a picture of the fellow using the portable station that was set up over in Wellington at the arena. The ways that you can deal with drought are to prepare now. Don't wait for the drought to happen. Do things with your plumbing system to try to convert to lower water use fixtures. If you don't have a cistern or some way of storing water, it may be a good idea to think about installing one so that you're ready. A lot of people with low yield wells, so those ones that might be less than 2 gallons per minute, install a system that's called like a trickle system. And basically what that is a tank that the well pumps water into, and then from the tank, it pumps into the house. It helps compensates period of peak water demand, but it also can help during a period of a drought for people to store their water. It's a place where you can haul the water, dump it in the tank, and maintain your water supply. Rain barrels are another excellent way. Catch the rainwater, use it in your gardens or other outdoor uses. Gray water recycling, relatively new, but something that can be retrofitted to an existing house. And if you're building a new house, definitely something to consider. If we look at our daily water use habits, a lot of our water is used for flushing our toilets. And the other high water uses are showering, washing dishes, and doing laundry. Now, it always kind of got to me why we need to use clean water to flush our toilets. Some of the new systems that are commercially available, they take the water from your shower and your laundry and your dishwashing, put it through a system where it's somewhat purified, but then use it to flush your toilet. Very easy to cut your water use down by at least 1/3 by doing gray water recycling. Likewise, things you can do in your house to save water. when we know that a rain infiltrates the ground and we need to maintain that infiltration, when we cover the ground with impervious surface, the water runs off. It doesn't have a chance to infiltrate. So there's many things we can do to maintain the groundwater recharge, such as installing a rain garden to take that rooftop water, infiltrate it back into the ground. This is really important for, say, some of the development that's occurring or planned on occurring near Picton out in the Warings Creek watershed, where we have cold water streams, development with fairly high impervious covers going to be built there. There needs to be ways to maintain the water balance so that the water keeps going back into the ground to keep the levels of the groundwater up as well as in the local creeks. So my last slide here, I hope that everybody's learned a little bit about the groundwater in Prince Edward County, where it can be found, and some of the mysteries. But also, I was hoping to tie in that little bit about climate change, that as well as water quality and groundwater contamination. But water is our most precious resource. You know, we can get by without oil or gas. It's proven here. You know, we back in the old days, before the days of vehicles, they had the horse and buggy. I don't think we're going to go back there, but I think we can come up with better ways to help protect our environment as well as our clean water resources that we have. They are very precious. So please do your part to protect it. And if you have any questions, I'll take them now through chat, but don't hesitate to reach out to me. I have my email listed here. Thank you, everybody, for listening to my talk this evening.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. That was fascinating, and we're grateful that you were able to do that for us. Now, Susan Warwick is going to handle the questions on the chat for you. So, Susan?
Yes, I'll start. Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Oh, thank you. That was an amazing. I learned so much more to learn. I really appreciate all the information you gave us. Anyway, anyone who has a question, please enter it into chat, or even a comment would be great. I'm going to start, I guess, the first question. Barry Pinsky, but I think he also found the link that he was looking for. So anyway, he was asking if Mark has a link to the 2004 Quinte Regional Groundwater Study. And then later on, he says he found it. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Some of the stuff on our website can be a little difficult to find, but I think it's under watershed management and then studies, planning and studies. You'll find a lot of numerous studies listed there, including the groundwater study. So it's a good read.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is from Don McLean. Does Mark know what proportion of the PEC wells are drilled wells as opposed to dug wells?
Ah, yeah, I do. And you've caught me. So I did do an update. We were looking at I had these numbers from the groundwater study, and I did use them, but we did do a look at the current well record database, and we're actually up over 6,000 wells now in Prince Edward County.
Wow.
And I had our GIS guy break that out for me, and I do not have the number with me, but I can definitely get that for you. But there's definitely still a higher percentage of drilled wells than dug wells. We are seeing an increase in dug wells because of a trend. Some people call them blasted wells. So as you know, I've talked about our geology. We have lots of bedrock. It's hard to dig one of those large diameter wells because you can't really dig the bedrock, but they blast holes in the bedrock and install those large diameter well casings. There is an increasing trend of those type of wells. So the numbers are increasing. I didn't dwell a lot on that, but those wells are even more susceptible to contamination because they are so shallow as opposed to a deeper drill well. So if I was looking for a more secure water supply, I'd definitely go with the drilled well.
Mark, can I just interject a second? This is Jerry. Would you mind stop sharing your screen?
Oh,
There
yeah,
we go.
sure.
See people's faces. Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now where am I? Let's go. Okay, this question is from Helen Fearman. Can you please comment on the impact that several hundred sump pumps would have on the aquifers around Picton? There is a plan to build 700 plus homes in Picton, possibly all with basements requiring sump pumps. I'm wondering if we should be asking our planning department to disallow the building of basements in new developments. She's actually referring to base 31.
Okay, yeah. That is a really good question. So my take on that would be to do a proper study before the development occurs to identify where the water table is to make sure that the basements are above the water table. I live in Picton, very close to I look at my back window actually at a development, and I know they came around before they built the houses and drilled monitor wells, monitored their water table. So they did the proper studies to evaluate where the water table is, because the building code does in fact require basements to be above the water table. But yeah, if they're improperly built below the water table and those sump pumps are running, obviously that will have an impact on our water table. It will serve to lower it. We want to make sure things are developed properly. That would be how to deal with something like that.
Thank you. Okay, this is from Gary Mooney. Testing water before or after in-house treatment?
Both. So you want to know what your water supply is like, and if you have a problem such as something wrong with the well construction or septic system problem, so you want to know if the raw water is safe or has contamination in it, so you know how to address the problem. But I think you also want to know if your treatment system is working. So myself, I would do both, one before and after. I I do recommend treatment, but I don't recommend relying 100% on treatment. I think if there's a problem with your water supply and your raw water sample, you should look for the problem and how to fix the problem.
Okay, thank you. This was from panelist Stagg. She has a comment, an excellent presentation, thank you. And Gary Mooney again, can we get a copy of the slide deck?
Sure, I think so. Yeah, that it is recorded, this presentation, but I think I could probably make a PDF of it.
Okay, and then from Jess Fosgate, she says, thank you. And Adair Huchin, he says, thank you, Mark. How important is the big swamp, large wetland between Picton and Bloomfield to maintaining the groundwater levels and quality?
Very, very important. So wetlands play a very important role in storing our water as well as helping filter it, so that the big swamp, the appropriately named, is big, and it does hold a lot of water. It's part of the Consicon watershed. So the Consicon Creek is actually the largest watershed in Prince Edward County. It's kind of peculiar the way it flows. It starts at the cement plant and flows west out to Consicon Lake and then into Wellers Bay. So very important component of that watershed, as well as helping hold water through the summer months to help recharge it during those low periods.
Okay, next is from Gary Mooney. Can the water table beside a lake, beside a lake be lower than the lake level?
It can, but not usually. In those early slides, I tried to show the water table sloping down towards the lake and discharging. So usually that's the case, but um, I guess not so much in the case of a lake unless the lake dried up. But you'll notice here in the summer months, a lot of the water courses will dry up. And what's happened there is the water table has fallen low enough, like the seasonal fluctuation's been enough that it falls below the bottom of that creek. And that's a good point. That's something I didn't point out on that slide when I showed the hydrograph for the well. That well at Macaulay Mountain, the water levels fluctuate 3 meters over the course of a year. So that's like 10 feet. That's quite a fluctuation.
Thank you. And then from Victoria Taylor, what can the county do policy-wise to encourage low-impact development strategies like green gardens for new building development applications or new residential builds? The county is not interested in giving residents any incentive to reduce their water use. What are other ways to encourage people to make changes?
I guess more talks like we've done here, spreading the word to help people be aware of the things that they can do. A couple things here. And I don't know whether this program is still available, but I know the Bay of Quinte RAP, the Bay of Quinte Remedial Action Plan, did have a program where they would help fund rain gardens. And I know at least here in the town of Picton, for areas of the county that drain towards the Bay of Quinte, they had a program where they would come out and help design a rain garden and provide money towards building that rain garden. And further to that, I do know some of the planning for Prince Edward County as it relates to, say, the Picton settlement area and the Warings Creek watershed, where it actually is spelled out in the secondary plan that those low impact development things have to be considered to maintain the water balance, because that is a sensitive watershed. So I think there is some bright lights there, but promoting the awareness of it and making sure that people know what they can do.
Okay, Teresa and Joe Dale. Our home seems to be in an area with a high water table. Our sump pump seems to run continuously. Are there systems to capture the water and to reuse it, gardens, etc.?
You would have to contact a contractor to help you with that, but yes, potentially you could reuse that water if you pumped it into a tank and then pumped out of the tank to your garden. For sure, you could save some of that water and hold it back. It is difficult in some areas. I know that there's portions of Prince Edward County that the drainage may not be that great, and certainly seasonally there's a problem with the water table and if the basements have been built too low. But nice that you have some water, I guess, is the main point there. But if there's any way you can hold it back and reuse it, I think great.
Thank you. And from Amy Bodman, and she's saying this to everyone, Mark's presentation will be loaded onto the SSJI YouTube channel. So we will be able to see it later. And I think it takes about 2 weeks for it to get there.
Okay, great. Yeah,
And
thanks.
Gary Mooney has one more question. Your picture of septic discharge flowing into the well, doesn't the water become purified through flowing through the subsurface?
That is the theory. That's right. So unless your septic system isn't properly maintained or properly constructed, then there could be some short circuiting. Just another fact here. I mentioned the Public Health Ontario study where they reviewed the bacteriological testing results from 2008 to 2012. In 2012, they took the samples that tested positive for E. coli and did DNA testing to try to determine the origin, whether it was animal or human origin. And as shocking as this is, the majority of those tests came back as human origin. So what that means is we are contaminating our groundwater with our own septic systems. So we live in a sensitive environment. Like I mentioned, we have a highly highly vulnerable aquifer because of the thin soil over fractured bedrock. So if you're building a new home, or even if you're rebuilding your septic system, do not build it up gradient of your well and get it as far away as you can, and including from your neighbors as well. So the requirements right now are under the Ontario Building Code, which are province-wide requirements, but they're minimums. It doesn't mean that you can exceed the minimums.
Yeah, I think that's it for questions, unless anyone else can add anything. Victoria Taylor, such an important topic. Thanks, PECFN, and thank you, Mark, for presenting tonight.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Pass it on to Jerry. Oh, wait, one more. Oh, from Teresa. There are, mating trumpet. So this is, I guess, for Dale. Mating trumpeter swans in Bloomfield Mill Pond, but I don't know if they're trumpeter swans. Sorry. Anyway, the last comment, not related to your presentation.
So
It's nice
thank
though.
you.
I'm gonna go check those out. I like
Yes.
seeing swans.
Exactly. Anyway, thanks for a great presentation from Lisboa.
Thank you,
Yes.
Mark. And thank you, Susan, for doing such a great job on the questions and comments. And now over to Sheila.
Yes, well, we want to thank you, especially Mark, for giving us this fantastic introduction to Groundwater 101. I think we've learned so very much. It's been amazing. I didn't really realize that 60% of the county residents were on wells. That's there's so many enlightening bits of information that you gave us, and extraordinary ideas about how to protect our water and to try and safeguard it and keep it, recycle it and so on. So thank you again. And we have a little bag of goodies for you from the club to thank you for this excellent presentation. And we'll figure out a way to get that to you in the very near future.
Oh,
Thanks again, Mark. It was really, really interesting.
Thanks very much for having me and for listening to me. Apologies for maybe going on a little bit too long there, but there's
No.
lots to talk about.
You did not
was-
go on too long.
No.
So fascinating. And
Yes.
thank you very, very much. And I guess that's actually one more thing I wanted to just remind you of. So Sheila Kuja, who is right there on the screen, presentation on biodiversity, April the 16th at St. Andrews. And her intro is, most of us don't realize how important PEC is in protecting biodiversity and in maintaining so many communities and species that have already been lost in the province. So you want to find out about this, St. Andrews? April 13th and the 16th, sorry, and thank you, Sheila. But Mark, thank you so much. It was really good.
It was
Thank you. Okay, that's it. No.